Hey guys, welcome to this part 2 in-depth video guide to using ProStacker. For this video, I'd like you to imagine that you're a freelance Photoshop retoucher who's been brought into this team in order to perform some client feedback to this image that we're looking at the moment. The person who made the original image has since left the team, and it'll be up to you to decide how best to accommodate the client's requests. Along the way, I'll be talking about the Update Files tab in ProStacker and what the various time-saving functions available to you are here for replacing layers within your Photoshop file. You'll have a 3D artist available to you who will produce the renders as are used in your Photoshop file, but it will be up to you to make sure that everything's updated correctly and that the things that change from the client request are done properly and that the image is otherwise consistent as it was before. I think that's probably enough. Let's get started with the first piece of feedback. Okay then, so we know that the first piece of feedback is change this paint here from the blue to the black, and we'll be removing this slightly awkward reflection here on the wheel arch. As you've been through the file already, you know that the render layers that need remaking are the floor bounce and the car body. You say to the 3D artist available, okay, I'm going to need a new version of these two render layers with the black paint please. And you say to them, don't worry about this reflection, you're going to remove that in Photoshop, that's no trouble. A short while later, the 3D artist gets back to you and says, okay, these renders are done, here's the new one, this is the black, there's the blue. And so then the 3D artist says, where do you want me to save these? Do you want these to overwrite the images you're currently using, or would you like me to put them into a new folder for you? And just for this example, let's suppose you say, okay, go on, overwrite them, just save over the files and I'll update them in Photoshop. What this means is that rather than just these single images here, you're going to have to open up each of those newly created renders, and you're going to have to replace all of these render layers and all of the blending modes, the opacities, the masks for each one. It's going to be a fairly manual operation to just reconnect all the adjustment layers, things like that. All these layers are going to have to be updated to accommodate this new set of renders. This can be a little bit time consuming, and this is actually also the first step where ProStacker can help you out. Because we told the artist to save over the existing images, this allows you to use the reload buttons here. Right? You can see we have reload selected layers, reload modified layers, and reload all layers. They perform the same function as you can see. It just chooses which layers are going to be performed that operation on. Is it the selected, just the modified ones, or all layers? The selected and all is pretty straightforward, but when it says modified layers, what that's saying is it's going to look through all the layers in the comp and it's going to say, is there a more recent version of this file on the file system available? And if it is, I want to reload the image so that this Photoshop layer is updated to the latest version of the file on the hard drive or on the server. Since you told the 3D artist to overwrite the images, you're able to use the reload modified layers and it will automatically detect which are the layers that need updating. Just before I push that button, I'm going to tick on this Create Update timestamp here. I'll show you what that does in a moment, but let's just push this button. It's going to take a few seconds to do this because it's looking through every single layer in the comp and it's checking the metadata for them. There we go. It's identified the floor bounce and the car body render layers have been re-output, and it's going to say, do you want to reload these layers? We'll go, okay. And at this point, you can see it's identified the number of layers that need updating, and it's going through each one, just sort of somewhat manually replacing the footage. It's going to be checking the opacity and the blending mode of the original layer, loading the new one in, and then replacing the old one with the new one. As it's going, you might have seen just then the car paint changed from the blue to the black. It's going to be keeping the connections to the adjustment layers above it. It's going to be keeping the masks on the layers. So you're in for a consistent appearance of the layers as they change. Let's see, we're nearly finished here. If I scroll up to the top, let's close these folders for a moment. When I ticked that create update timestamp box, what that means is it's going to create a layer at the top showing what the image looked like before we performed this update operation. So this is pretty successful in my opinion. I can see that the other parts of the image have not been altered. I wanted those to be completely consistent. We can see it's only the car paint which is changing, which is exactly what we were hoping for. So that went as expected. One thing that I would mention at this point is that the decision earlier on to tell the 3D artist to overwrite the original images that made up this comp and to not increment them into a new folder was probably the wrong decision in my opinion. Personally, I think it is always better to save images into new folders so that you've got that kind of history of the project that you can go back and refer to. So if we go back in time for a moment, let's undo this reloading operation we did a moment ago. If you've seen part 1, you'll know that when certain operations are done in ProStacker, snapshots are created in the history window. I can click this pre-reload layers one here, and we're back to where we were with the blue car. From this point, we now can imagine that we told the artist to save their renders into a new folder. So what this means is that we're not able to use the reload functions because this time the original images have not been overwritten. So if I go reload modified layers, it's going to tell you there are none because there are no changes to the images in here. What we need to do this time is replace the layers in this comp with the new files. The quickest way to do this would actually be to use the Repath Selected Layers button. Unlike reload, which just replaces the image with the file in the same location as the metadata points to in the current layer, this one is going to say, tell me the folder location for the images, and ProStacker will look for files that have the same name as those that are currently in the comp. Because the 3D artist has saved a new set of images which are actually named the same as these ones here, they're still going to be called floorbounce.png, carbodygi.png, things like that. All that's changed is the folder location of those images. The actual names of the files are the same. This means that we can use the Repath button here, and it's the quickest way to do it. There is no Repath modified layers, so in this case we will have to select the layers that we want. It's no trouble. It doesn't matter if you select the folder, it doesn't matter if you select the adjustment layers, things like that. I'm just going to click the one at the top, shift click the one at the bottom. I'll go Repath Selected Layers, we'll go OK. It'll open up a window here. The thing it was doing for a moment there, you may have seen, is it checks that each one of these layers has metadata to enable it to do the repathing operation. If none of the layers had metadata, it would at this point have said you're unable to repath these layers because they don't have metadata. So not a problem in this case because the file was stacked using ProStacker. So the 3D artist has told us, okay, I saved the renders into this folder here. We'll go select folder. And what you're going to see here is actually the exact same as what you saw earlier when we did the reload modified layers. It's the same process, except this way it allows you to work just a little bit more sustainably. So when I'm using this tool personally, I find I'm using Repath layers 90% of the time, just because it's a more sustainable way to work. I'll speed the footage up here for you. The very last thing to mention is that we still have to remove the little awkward reflection there on the wheel arch. I'll just very quickly duplicate that car gloss layer. I'm going to reconnect these adjustment layers. I'll put this back to the normal blending mode. We'll zoom in on this area here. Maybe that's a bit too far. I'll be using the patch tool to do this, so I'm going to draw a little lasso shape around this space. That'll do. And using the patch tool, I'll just drag off to the side a little, deselect, and that's done a pretty good job of it. For the sake of this video, I'll say that's good enough. So, okay, we're all done with that feedback round. Okay, so now we know what the second round of client feedback is. They want us to remove the number plate and change the general angle of the lighting and reflections in the scene just to bring the sun a little further round to the front of the car to illuminate the bodywork a bit better around here. So, okay, what does that mean in terms of render layers which will be needed? We'll have to do the ID mats because the number plate is visible in these. We'll also have to do the utilities for the same reason. And since the sun is being adjusted on the overall look of the car, that means we're going to need the car body, we'll need the floor bounce as well, and the wheels too. The windows are such a generic appearance, I probably wouldn't suggest they need replacing in this case. So what that means is you'll be having to tell the 3D artist, it's these 5 here, the ID mats, utilities, and those 3. As you've probably guessed, when the 3D artist saves these into a new folder, you'll be using the Repath buttons again, just like we did last time. In this instance, it might be worth choosing Repath All layers rather than going Repath Selected, simply because there's quite a lot of images that are going to need updating this time, and it's going to be a bit cumbersome to have to manually select them all. When the 3D artist has saved out their passes, they're only going to be saving out the ones we've asked them to do. And if you go Repath All layers, ProStacker is just going to skip any layers which there is no replacement file for, so you're not at risk of damaging your layers that aren't going to be replaced. So in this case, it's probably, you might as well just go Repath All layers. Okay. Oh, wait, haha, I forgot to turn on the timestamp. I'll cancel the dialog when it comes up in a second. Don't worry about that. Yes, let's create another timestamp so we can do a bit of a before and after when the operation is complete. Okay, I'll go Repath All layers. Okay. What it's doing here again, you might remember, it just checks the metadata on all the layers just to make sure that it is appropriate for them to do the repath operation. It takes a few seconds in large files, but it's pretty quick in small ones. So let's find the folder that the 3D artist has saved the images in. It was this one here, 3 PNG, and we'll go OK. Just like before, you can see that it's launched into updating the layers. Because there are files to update in these ID mats, it's going straight into them. It's telling us right here there are 77 layers to update. I know it's not really going to do that many because not all of these layers actually are going to be replaced. I think in reality it'll be probably more like 40 or so. What you'll see in a moment is when it gets to some that are missing, it just skips straight over them. Yeah, there you go. It flew through those and now it's into the wheels. At this point you can see the number plate is starting to disappear as the various layers which contain it are going to be replaced. At some point too you'll see the lighting change on the front of the paint as well when the car paint layers are updated as well. At this point here you'll see that the operation has completed and that we're given this window appearance here with quite a lot of information. Let's just take a moment to look at that. At the top it's saying these layers were not updated because they contain no ProStacker metadata. There's only one on the list, it's the layer called Vignette. This was up in the color correction folder right near the top. This was just a simple gradient drawn on a brand new Photoshop layer. We wouldn't expect that to have any metadata because it wasn't a file loaded in ProStacker, so that's completely correct. We wouldn't want that layer changing. Next up it says layers not updated because their replacement files were not found. Here we can see these are all the layers in the comp which do contain metadata, but for which the 3D artist did not save out new versions of. So once again, this is as expected, this is correct. It's just that because we pushed Repath All, ProStacker is letting us know that it didn't find these images here. Of course, we knew it wouldn't anyway, but it could be useful to know which ones weren't done. So you can just go, OK, and that's it. At this point, let's go up to the top and we'll compare the before and after using the ProStacker timestamp and let's see what we get. So there is good news and there is bad news. The good news is that the number plate has been successfully removed, the lighting on the car has been changed, and that everything seems as it should be. It doesn't look like the grades have been altered in any way. It's the correct appearance for the shot. The bad news is that the reflection that we painted out earlier has returned. So why has this happened? Let's take a look in the Photoshop layers, particularly where the car paint is being created, and we'll see if we can identify what's causing this problem. If I turn on and off this ref patch layer, the one that we made earlier on where we used the patch tool to remove that, I can see that nothing is changing. In fact, if I disable the mask on this and I'll isolate this layer, we can see that it's back to how it was. What we can tell has happened here at this point is that this layer has been repathed or updated just the same as all the others have. I can confirm this if I want to by going to the metadata tab. I'll go get metadata for selected layer, and we can see if we look at the file path, it's pointing to the 003 folder that I mentioned earlier on. That's where the 3D artist has saved this round of images to. So because you may recall when I made this layer, it was made by duplicating this layer here, and then I just reconnected the adjustment layers to it. What this means is that when layers are duplicated, their metadata information from ProStacker is preserved in that duplication. So ProStacker just assumed these two layers were exactly the same. It didn't worry about the fact that these pixels had been updated. It just said, okay, this is paint gloss set.png. Yes, there is a file in this folder. I will update it. I'll take this moment to go back to the snapshot created before this update. So there it is. We're now back before that most recent repathing operation. And I'll show you the correct way to handle this kind of thing. There's really two options you've got. If, like in this case, we do not want this layer to be updated in the future, this is a sort of permanent small patch that we want to remain and be excluded from any future updates. We could choose to go remove metadata from layers, selected layer. What this now means, if I go get metadata, it's not going to find anything. It still will for this one, which we do want to be updated, but this one now is completely free from any future changes. This is it's a perfectly good way of working, but it does mean obviously that you have to remember to do this. You have to remember to go remove the metadata from this layer. My personal preference is, if I am going to be creating a kind of a sort of patch adjustment layer to the pixels of a layer, I would prefer to go Control A, Control C, Control D. I've just copied this selected layer. I'll create a new layer right here, and then I'll paste this one that I just did into place. And we've got the exact same thing, except if I go get metadata for this layer, you'll see that there is none to begin with. I can test it, it still is on here. If I change it to that one, there's nothing. So as you can see, if you make a new layer and just paste pixels into it, it's not going to take the metadata from the source layer. At this point, you could choose to perform the exact same patch operation that we did before. I won't bother doing it again because we had a perfectly good result from here, but this is my suggested way of doing this. If you want to perform a patch to the pixels, copy and paste that image into a blank layer, and then you don't need to worry in the future about updates, overwriting the changes that you've done. It is something to be aware of. I know this basically means perhaps a slight adjustment to your behavior using Photoshop, but when done correctly, as I hope you've seen in this video so far, it can be quite a major time saver to have these lined up correctly to enable you to perform, these repathing operations. So, okay, with that done, I'll just repath all the layers again, not forgetting the timestamp. I won't make you watch all this again, it's the same process. I'll speed up the footage here. And this time, if I turn on the timestamp from before, you can see that we've got the updates to the number plate and the sun has moved position. And this time we've retained the patch that was performed in the previous round. Okay, this one's quite straightforward, just a case of turning the wheels so that the alloy is facing towards the camera a little bit more. If we think about which render layers are required, it's going to be the ID mat and the utility because the geometry is changing. We'll also need the wheels render layer, but we will not be requiring any of the car body or the floor bounce layers either, because these were rendered without the wheels. So in terms of what instructions are required for the 3D artist, it's only to recreate these 3 layers, save them into a new folder. I'll create a new timestamp and we'll repath the selected layers to the folder that the artist saves the images in. So I'll do that now and speed up the footage for you. Okay, let's compare this to the timestamp layer. We can see that something is not correct about this. What looks like the new wheel is being cut off at a unnatural point here on the side of the car, and there's a bit of an artificial line here as well where it looks like some kind of adjustment layer is being incorrectly applied to the new footage. If I'll look in the wheels folder, we can see that there are a couple of masks on these layers here. Let's just disable them for a moment. We can see that the image, there's only one of them turned on, the wheels PNG. It has been successfully updated, but unfortunately the masks for the folder and also this levels here are still based on that of the previous position of the wheel. So what's happening is that the new wheel here is being kind of stenciled by the alpha of the previous wheel. What this is showing you is one of the other limitations about the update files processors in general, which is that they will not update the masks on folders or on layers. This will require the artist basically to kind of visually review the effect of the change and to identify any issues where things like this are occurring. So in this case, I know I'll need to update this mask here and also this one here, which looks to be just the tires. Fortunately, of course, we did just update the ID mats, so I can grab these now. And there we go, that looks correct. We can see that now that the tyre does stick out a little bit in front of the bodywork, as it should do at that rotation. So we can see this time, it looks correct to me. I just wanted to give you that example because it's quite a straightforward one for showing that you do need to be careful with what masks are assigned to layers and really the benefit of creating these timestamp layers in order to be able to successfully review them, and it's quite simple to perform the fixes once you identify them. So with that in mind, we've now completed this round as well. Okay, so we know what the last piece of feedback is, and on the surface it's the most simple one so far. Our poor 3D artist can even take a bit of a break for once. So move the car to the left. Okay, no problem, let's just do it. Let's just grab these 2 groups here, and there we go. Absolutely no problem. What this means in terms of ProStacker, however, is a little bit more complicated. Because we've chosen to move these images away from their initial starting point, unfortunately, this means that these functions here to reload and repath the layers will no longer work as expected. I'll show you what I'm talking about. If I, let's say I want to update, say, just the gloss and the flake, there's no need to do more than that. I'm just going to go reload selected layers here. What this is going to do is, because these files have not been altered since they were loaded in here, they should load in and the image should look exactly the same. I'm just replacing a layer with a layer that is the same. What you can see straight away is that this has completely not worked at all. You can tell actually that the layers that we just reloaded have gone back into their initial starting position. It hasn't respected the fact that we moved the top level groups containing all these layers to the left a bit. And unfortunately, when you're working with normal layers, ProStacker just has no way of knowing if these layers have been moved from their starting position. Another consequence of this actually, in fact, is that if you've chosen to make the canvas size any larger, again, when you go to reload or repath the layers, they will not come into the same position as they were to begin with. So obviously this is a pretty unfortunate result. And so what can we do about this? Well, the answer is, if you're working with normal layers, not much. If you are prepared to work with smart objects instead of normal layers, however, the problems that we just encountered there do not exist. It's actually a really straightforward case of just reloading or repathing the images. It doesn't matter how you've moved the car or anything. If you've expanded the canvas, it will work absolutely fine. In this image that I've just opened here, this is the exact same Photoshop document as the one that we were looking at right before the first piece of feedback. You may remember it was a case of changing the blue paint into the black paint. What I've done is I'd gone back, added the images to the stacked list here, and I've gone load files as smart objects. By default it's normal layers. In this case I went smart objects. It loaded them all in as smart objects, and I just took a few minutes to rebuild this comp, matching all the grades and the adjustment layers, things like that, so that it's the same as that image we had prior to the first round. To show you that it's not a problem when you're working with smart objects, I'll perform that same client request again. We'll move the car to the left a bit, and this time what I'll do is I'll recreate that first feedback round, you know, the one where we changed the paint from blue to black. I've selected the floor bounce in the car. Let's go repath selected layers. I'll create a timestamp. Let's navigate to the folder where the images used for the round 1 feedback are, and we'll just let it go through. There we go. Perfectly seamless transition, and it's looking a little better than this one, which looks a bit kind of Picasso-esque. So there you go. If you expect to be moving the layers around, if you're going to be enlarging your comp, things like that, please do consider working with smart objects as your base layers rather than normal layers. I know this is a matter of personal preference, and in my background, working on an image like this, I wouldn't usually be working all with smart layers. I'd usually load the renders in as normal layers, and perhaps I'd make if I had a photographic backplate, maybe that would be a smart object and the rest would be normal. Since I've started using ProStacker for tasks like this, I do find that generally I will be working with smart objects as my base layers, simply because of situations like this. It just gives you a lot more control over the file, and it makes version control of layers basically to be much, much easier. Okay, so we're all done for this one. I hope this hasn't been too much of an information overload. Just in case it has, I'll quickly summarize these points again for you right now. We started with the blue car paint, and the first request was to change it to the black car paint. This process was very straightforward. We spoke about how to use the reload options if the footage has been overwritten, or to use the repath operations if the new renders have been saved in a separate location. Following on from this, the next request was to change the angle of the sun so that the lighting was a little different on the front here, and to remove the number plate. This was done with no problem at all, but we did encounter the problem where the reflection patch we did in the previous round was returned because the layer was overwritten during the update process because it still contained the metadata. The solution to this one was to remove the metadata from the patch layer prior to the update, or to have created this layer by copying and pasting the pixels from this one into a blank new Photoshop layer so that there was no metadata to begin with. The next request was to turn the wheels a little bit to the side. That was no problem in terms of the repathing operation, but it did remind us that we need to be quite vigilant of any kind of issues, in this case masking issues, that can be arisen by the geometry changing. The solution was quite straightforward. It was just a case of going in and swapping these two masks here in the wheels layer, but it did show the benefit of creating these timestamp layers as a means of detecting issues like this. Finally, all we had to do was move the car to the left a little bit. That's no trouble in itself, but it did show us the limitation in ProStacker when it comes to updating layers after the layer position has been altered. The solution to this was to use a smart object based workflow, which does allow you to move the layers around and still to perform these update operations with no trouble at all. The goal of this video really was to introduce you to how powerful a time-saving tool these options can be if you're updating renders in a large Photoshop file. But along the way, I really wanted to give you the most accurate and detailed impression of what you can expect this tool to do, really, and where you as the artist and Photoshop user will still have to get involved in certain aspects of it. I just wanted you to have really the best understanding possible before making any decisions about how to use it. But I hope this video has shown that, if you're willing to make pretty small and simple adjustments to the way in which you structure your files and your layers and things like that, you do have access to these tremendously powerful tools for version control of layers. If you do have any further questions, or if there's something that you weren't sure about in this video, please do feel free to leave them in the comments. I'd be very happy to hear from you. My name's Ben, I'm the founder of Grebesoft, and I was also the designer of ProStacker, so I'd be very happy to help you if you have any questions. Yeah, I think that's about it. All the best, take care, goodbye. If you would like to try out ProStacker for yourself, there is a fully featured 1-month free trial available, as was used in the video today. Just click the link in the top of the video description and it will take you to this page on the Adobe Exchange. Sign in with your usual Adobe login details and just click the trial button. ProStacker will be automatically installed on your Photoshop using the Adobe Creative Cloud. It works on Windows and on Mac and requires Photoshop version 19 and above.